Well, talking about fighting, I know you have a somewhat unique way of raising your children and disciplining them. So let's talk about attachment parenting. This is something you've put yourself out there and talked about. And I'm just curious, where does that stem from? Is this something you knew you wanted to do before you had kids? Or as you kind of got into parenthood, realized, this classical way that most people are raising their kids just isn't going to work for me? Let's talk about the evolution. How did that come on your radar to start?
Yeah, I had friends who had kids before me, and definitely had some friends from the Bay Area. That's the San Francisco Bay Area who, ideas flow freely in the Bay, and so I had, friends who had the first home birth I had ever heard of, and friends who were doing, safe bed sharing and extended breastfeeding and like breastfeeding on demand. It sounded crazy to me, to be honest with you, but what I saw is that as these friends of ours, started raising these kids, and we were still, young and childless. What I saw was that there was a kind of communication shorthand that seemed to be really working for these friends of ours and their kids. And as these children got older, they were exceptionally sensitive and articulate and compassionate. And while what it looked like was early extreme dependence on the parent, these children grew into very independent, confident, loving, sensitive little people. And so I started reading more about attachment parenting. And honestly, I was a grad student in neuroscience, and we study neurodevelopment and embryology. And um, attachment theory is a real thing. So that's not, kooky science. That's the notion of building a secure bond, and the fact is a lot of our parenting that we think of is really it is very Western centric, and it is not the way that people parent all over the world. The notion that children should be sleeping independently, eating independently, and reciting their alphabet, by the time they're 1.5 is really a Western notion that is designed around concepts of success and productivity. And so, yeah, we decided to raise our kids according to the principles of attachment parenting, and many people do. I'm also a lactation educator counselor, so we do connect very strongly with the bonding and parenting that comes with breastfeeding, especially breastfeeding on demand. My children are now 12 and 15. They are both weaned and have been for many years. They put themselves to sleep. They don't sleep in bed with me. They are very independent little people, and they're very sensitive and tender and articulate. And there are many ways to get children like that. But I know that for my kids' personalities, this has been the kindest way to raise them. And while it's not so important, anymore to think about the natural birth and home birth decisions that we made and the breastfeeding decisions, the notion of gentle discipline is still something that you lay the foundation for, so that by the time they're 12 and 15, hopefully they still are talking to you, the way that is helpful for all.
And what does gentle discipline look like? I know the basics, it's not hitting, which makes total
Oh,
sense,
sure,
and then
right.
that's a pretty common sense, and then no timeouts. I'm just curious, how
Yeah,
does this
I
work then?
mean,
What are the boundaries?
um, there are a lot of boundaries. I'm actually pretty strict as a parent. The idea is that there's a relationship that you build with your child, in their formative years, so that the language surrounding what you need from them, what you ask of them, and what you'd like from them, it's a different kind of system. It's not an authoritarian system, which doesn't mean that the child is in charge, or that the child doesn't do what they want to, and they get to run the house. On the contrary, we have plenty of boundaries, and they knew from a very young age what behavior was okay and what was not okay. But yeah, the notion is we did not utilize timeouts. We don't utilize kind of I don't want to say nonsensical, but to say to a child, if you don't stop this behavior, you can't have dessert. It doesn't make sense to most children. I mean, it doesn't make sense to most adults. So, trying to have related consequences for behavior is important. And I'm not saying that we don't remove children from situations where they're being, destructive or disruptive. But the notion of having kind of this you go sit in the corner concept is not something that we tend to utilize.
Can you give, you don't have to use even a specific example from your own life, but I have a young daughter now, and this is intriguing to me. I'm curious, like when a child does do something that is totally disobeying what the parent wants, how does that look?
Well, I mean, in the moment, obviously it looks like making sure no one gets hurt. My older son started he had a wooden train set, as many children do. He had a wooden train set when his brother was born, and just, as an expression of a lot of feelings, he started throwing the the train cars. And obviously I stated we don't throw train cars. We try to avoid using the word no, because often when you keep saying no to a child, what you get is a child that constantly says no. So statements like that. And look, it takes a lot of communication, but um, the second time he threw the train car, I very calmly took all of the train cars and placed them on top of the refrigerator where he could not reach them. And what happened was he was extremely upset, for about 3 minutes. And I was with him when he was upset. He kept asking me to take them down, and he got more and more upset the more I wouldn't take them down. But eventually, he stopped crying, he calmed down, and the train cars remained up there for, I don't know, a couple more days, and he never threw a train car again. Now, I'm sure that there are many examples where this doesn't work for people. For our child, with the dialogue that we had set up, it did work for our child. Um, and, as I said, it's not always easy to have related consequences for behavior. But one of the things that programs like quality parenting teach is that when a child is, quote, misbehaving, it's almost always not about that. So if a child is having a power struggle with you, it's usually because they feel oppressed, in a child way. If they're wanting attention, you will likely feel annoyed, meaning usually you can judge what they need by how you feel. So when you have a child that's constantly tugging at you and doing things, and you're just like, oh my gosh, I need a minute, that's usually that the child needs more attention. And of course, you can't always give as much attention as a child wants or needs, but reframing their behavior in terms of what need they're trying to get met to the best of their ability is also just a helpful place to start.
And as somebody who's done so much throughout their career in so many different avenues, I mean, you're an actress, you have a PhD, you've done a lot. You're a mom of two. Where along the journey did you have kids? And then how did you manage to be so attached to them and still be so productive and continue on all these different things that you were doing?
So the answer is I actually didn't get to do all those things. I had my first son in graduate school. I had finished my course curriculum, which meant that I was in data analysis and writing phase. So I was able to write my thesis, essentially laying down while breastfeeding. But my first son was born in grad school. I filed my thesis, defended my thesis, and then took my doctoral hood about 7 months pregnant with my second. And I was home. I was home with both of my children. I left academia. I did not pursue a postdoc. I made a very difficult decision, which may not be the right decision for everyone, but it was the decision for me. And I was the primary caregiver for the first 2 years of my older son's life. And then the first year, and then, kind of on and off as I started working again for his second year. So there's a tremendous amount of sacrifice involved with being a parent at all, no matter how you do it. But for me, I did make the decision to leave academia so that I could be physically with my kids. And I did go. I taught. I sometimes taught with a child strapped to my chest. I tutored piano and Hebrew, and I designed a neuroscience curriculum for junior high and high schoolers in our homeschool community. I did all of that while being the primary caregiver. Also, my kids didn't eat solids or even drink water until their second year. So I was physically the sustenance for each of my children exclusively for the first year. And we didn't use bottles with our first son at all. So yeah, it's a very physically attached existence.
And was that hard for you in the beginning, at least, being somebody who's such a go-getter and, you've done so much by that point in your career and for your age to, slow down? Not obviously a mother is super busy, but in a different way. Was that hard for you?
It was. I know that it's harder for other people than it was for me because I already knew that growing a human and then birthing a human was not going to be the same life that I had before. And one of the reasons that, I am such a believer in natural birth and, home birth and things like that, is it does force a preparation and a consciousness on you that already indicates that it's time to shift into a different phase of life. And I'm 45 and I know that especially for young moms today, the notion of like my life has to change can feel very oppressive, and this is why many people choose not to have children because it's not the same as not having children. So for me, I was really blessed with, a mother who valued both her feminism and her career, but also really valued being a mom and a homemaker. So I was raised with a real reverence for that. And our culture does not really have a reverence for that. And you can see that reflected in maternity leave and paternity leave and the way we, lack the way many families lack protection to build a family when a baby is born. Many Northern European countries are really ahead of the curve in this, in terms of understanding that having a baby it's a shift in life for the entire family, and having a government that supports that is really, really, important. So for me, I kind of was preparing for that, and again, in the natural birth and home birth and midwifery communities, that is something that you're kind of trained for, that kind of preparation, especially as you prepare your body and your mind, to manage labor without drugs.